For my fifth grade students to be successful in meeting our social studies standards, they must be able to first understand difficult vocabulary terms that they will use throughout the units. And so it becomes a challenge for teachers like me and like others to ensure that all multilingual learners are provided with effective strategies to increase their vocabulary and knowledge of social studies as they progress with their English integration at the same time. And as Graffin stated, rather than throwing away the playbook and abandon the strategies they have found effective, teachers can adapt these strategies and build on them to deliver instructions that is more theoretically sound. And with social studies, they require students to develop a high level of thinking and complex language. Within our school district, we have been given practices where students can write, create visuals, representations, and explain models that are tied into each social studies unit. And my problem statement is using guided language acquisition and design GLAD strategies to increase academic vocabulary of fifth grade students in social studies. So, by reinforcing the usage of vocabulary terms with Project GLAD components, I can prepare students in understanding higher complex vocabulary terms that they will use throughout their social studies learning career. According to the data of the U.S. Department of Education, based on the 2014-2015 data, in my rural community, there is 39.7% of our multilingual learners, and this has increased since then. And in that case, I can determine what components of Project GLAD will be effective for my students' vocabulary growth. This will also help me determine future social studies units and how I can collaborate with other teachers for Project GLAD strategies in social studies to be practiced throughout all elementary schools. My research question is, how does the use of Project GLAD components impact the learning of students measured by pre and post tests in fifth grade social studies classroom settings? And in my fifth grade classroom, I noticed that my multilingual learners are struggling with difficult vocabulary. This can be frustrating for them as it currently is difficult for my native English speakers to learn. And so my multilingual learners need to be able to build their vocabulary to increase their knowledge and understanding of social studies concepts being taught and be able to use those vocabulary terms correctly. I believe that by using instructional strategies that are effective for my multilingual learners will be very beneficial for all my students, including those students with learning disabilities. The product that I will be using to assess the effectiveness of Project GLAD components will be how effective my students are using complex vocabulary terms during our lessons on colonial America. Multiple of the GLAD strategies being used are focused on heavy vocabulary practices. Some of the vocabulary components I will be using are expert groups, process grids, observation charts, and chants. All of the components aligned will be for their final assessment, which will consist of 10 multiple choice questions, and I will give my students the assessments at the beginning of our Colonial America unit as a pretest. Then I will give the exact same assessment at the end of our Colonial America unit as a post test. This will give me the ability to compare the results of the pre and the post assessments to analyze how effective Project GLAD components are within my research project. This product aligns with my research questions and is appropriate to assess the effectiveness of the research project because students must be able to make connections using complex vocabulary terms and that are used throughout our Colonial America unit. The assessment will be aligned with the knowledge that the students need for them to increase their academic vocabulary and how the vocabulary is connected within our Colonial America unit. With the expert groups, the observation charts, process grids, and chants, students are using repetitive language and vocabulary to connect their learning throughout each lesson with the incorporation of the GLAD components. So using the same assessment from the pre and the post assessment, I can have a direct comparison of growth from each student had throughout our Colonial America unit. This will help me view the overall growth of my class throughout the unit as well. In this research study, all my fifth grade students will be participating, but a sample group of 9 English language learners, ELL students, will be used for the data collection. My classroom routine has made it possible for me to focus on students in small group settings, therefore students will not feel any sort of exclusion during our lessons. All of my fifth grade students will receive the same instructional strategies as my ELL students to ensure every student has an equitable education. The study will take place during the second quarter of our year, and it will take approximately 2 weeks to conduct. The participating students have been chosen as a sample group for the study, including 5 girls and 4 boys. The ELL students are also progressing per the WIDA assessment, and all the participants' native language is Spanish and is the primary language spoken in their households. I am choosing to use a quantitative research method for my proposed Capstone research project. The selected ELL students, as well as my whole class, will be participating in GLAD strategies while they learn about colonial America during our social studies unit. The data will determine if the GLAD strategies have a high impact on my selected ELL students. I will be using quantitative research again in order to collect all of the data. The pretest will be given to students during our social studies block period prior to the unit beginning. Participants will then have the entire social studies block to complete the pretest. The test will be scored, but it will not affect the grade of the students since it will just be used to determine the student's current knowledge of the content. The same test will be given at the end of the Colonial America unit as a post-test, and the scores will be evaluated and compared. The post-test will be entered in the gradebook and will be given back to students alongside the pretest to see their own growth. Data from the post-test will be determining the impact of GLAD strategies on the learning of English language learners in my classroom. With the project GLAD strategies, I can determine if this is an effective instructional strategy that will engage my students in their language development. I will be using descriptive statistics that will display the basic features of the data collected to analyze the quantitative data gathered. I will be using the mean, median, and mode to average out the pretest to the average of the post-test. If the post-test average is higher than the student's pretest average, then the data can determine that the impact of the GLAD strategies used on my English language learners was effective. During our 2-week Colonial America unit, students will first begin with the pretest for me to collect their data for prior knowledge. I will then begin the Project GLAD handouts to guide me through the instructions throughout the 2 weeks. We will begin with an inquiry chart that will be based on what the students know about colonial America and what they want to know about it. We will revisit this inquiry chart daily to respond to the questions that have been answered or to add questions that may come up from each day of instruction. This is important because it will help my students know what they know from the beginning about colonial America. By going back and reviewing questions, students are building on prior knowledge and making me aware that the students are being interactive with our unit. I will then create a 13 colonies pictorial with the students where they will get to know the locations of the colonies and the important roles of the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies. The colony pictorial will be important for students because they are getting the overall glimpse of what the colonies are and what they are known for. The New England, Middle, and Southern colonies are split up in color coding order so that the students can begin to make connections with the facts of each region. This is important because it makes it easier for students to make connections with vocabulary to the correct colonies due to the color coordination. They will then receive a second pictorial of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where I will color code the reasons for founding, geographical features, government, economy, and interesting facts about the colony. The pictorial will include written information as well as pictures. Again, with the color coordination, students will have an easier time remembering each concept of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is important because many of my students will need guidance without having it feel embarrassing for the amount of support that I am giving them. With the categories I have listed above, they will continue with the different colonies we will learn. This is also important because it provides that consistency and students will know exactly what to look for when it comes to our expert groups. Students will then be separated into 4 expert groups where they will learn about a colony. The colonies are separated by 2 Southern, 2 Middle, and 1 New England colony. Students will become experts and share their findings of reasons for founding, their geographical features, government, economy, and interesting facts of the colonies. Expert groups are crucial because it's giving students a chance to speak, write, and sketch their ideas before sharing it out with other people. Students will already feel confident in sharing it because of the categories for the colonies will be the exact same ones we did for the Massachusetts Bay colony. This brings familiarity for the students and makes it easier for students to access their prior knowledge to what those categories mean and what we are looking for. We will then collect all that data from the expert groups in a process grid about the colonies and discuss similarities and differences between the colonies. This process grid still has the same categories as I stated prior, and it gives students a chance to share their research, and we will fill it out together. This is important because we've talked about this as a whole class and in small groups. This gives students the confidence because they know what they want to share since they are involved in the research process. Finally, students will be given the post-test to display their knowledge on colonial America. When the post-test is given, I will take the scores from the pre-test and look at the growth of the selected participants. This will be important because with my results, I will be able to determine if the Project GLAD strategies were effective for my overall students, as well as the selected participants of this project. The required resources for this capstone project will be the Project GLAD handouts for the Colonial America unit. These handouts include the colonies for the expert groups, guide to the Colonial America inquiry chart, guide to the pictorials, and guide for the process grid. I will also be using white butcher paper and markers to create the material provided by the Project GLAD handouts. I will have copies of the expert groups ready to go in folders with the appropriate colony in the front, and this will help me stay organized and be able to collect their work. I will also need to make copies of the pre and the post-test handouts to give to the students at the scheduled times. All students in my classroom will have an equitable teaching environment and will be given the same instructions that I am going to base my research on. I will only be using the data from the 9 participants I have selected for my research. I will not be including their names or any other sort of personal information. I will not be recording of any of their personal information like their address, their name, their phone number. I will only be recording their pre and post scores from the assessment, and I will be giving it to them so they can see the comparison of the pre and the post assessment. Data analysis was conducted on the pre and post tests that were given before and after the Colonial America unit. The mean, median, and mode scores of the participants were calculated in the bar graphs as shown on this slide, and these are used to show the results. The pre-test scores range from 0 to 3 with a mean score of 1.4 or a 14%. The post-test scores ranged from 8 to 10 with a mean score of 9.2 or 92%. Therefore, the mean growth was 7.8 or 78%. This data concluded that research-based instructional strategies increased the understanding of the complex colonial America vocabulary for my English language learners in my 5th grade class. This next bar graph displays the individual test scores that the English language learners earned on both the pre and the post test. All of the participants in the study showed growth from pre to the post test. The average growth for each student was a 9.2 or 92%. The data collected displayed the students' understanding of colonial America content and complex vocabulary increased during the unit. The data demonstrated the use of Project GLAD instructional strategies during the Colonial America unit had a positive impact on the comprehensions of the content instructed during the Colonial America unit as measured by the pre and post test. There were multiple factors that may have skewed the findings of my study. The students who participated in my research study I have known since September. These are students that are in my 5th grade classroom currently, so my students already know me very well, including my classroom management, my routines, and the way that I teach them. They also knew that I was conducting my master's program at the time, and I needed the research study in order to graduate. This could factor in that they probably tried harder to be successful in order to please me. And another factor that skewed my findings in my research study is the attendance rate. During my research project, we had 2 snow days during the time, and I found it difficult since I had to make up those days, and the result, this could have impacted the scores on the pre and the post test. Further investigation is recommended on this topic to see if any similar results are found. I would recommend that the study to be started towards the beginning of the school year and run through the entire course of the school year with different social studies units. I would also recommend that my fifth grade team at my school use Project Glide strategies so we can compare our results. With the results, it can provide more reliable data that will help determine the impact of Project Glide instructional strategies. I would also recommend further investigation on the impact of GLAD instructional strategies on students who are on individualized